Okay, guys, welcome back to part 3 of Med Legal. We're going to get into a little bit of confidentiality stuff, and then we're going to get into advanced directives and like physical signs of death and stuff like that, so that you guys have a good understanding of that. Confidentiality, okay, big topic right now as well. We need to keep everything private. All right. The only people that we can tell what is going on about our patient are the nurses and or doctors that we are giving report to on the other end of the hospital. Okay. We are not allowed to tell family what patient said in the back of the ambulance. We are not allowed to tell legal guardians what actually went on in the back of the ambulance here in the state of New Mexico. Okay. Information can only be disclosed for medical care, billing, and legal purposes. And in order to, for legal purposes, they must have a subpoena in place in order to have access to you and your charting. Okay. This is all about HIPAA, and HIPAA stands for Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act. All right. If we violate this, this can lead to extremely steep fines and possibly even jail time. That's pretty much all I'm going to talk about with confidentiality. You guys will get a lot more training when you guys get into your services on this. Okay. Moving into advanced directives. Advanced directives are specifies treatment the patient would want if the patient becomes unresponsive, unconscious, or unable to make a decision for themselves. The big one is, and the one that's most well known, is the DNR. That stands for Do Not Resuscitate. It is an order. It is an advanced directive that gives permission for EMS and really any other medical professional to not start resuscitative efforts. And what I mean by resuscitative efforts specifically are like CPR or putting in an advanced airway into our patient and actually breathe for our patient. Nothing artificial, I guess, is the best way to put it. Now, do not resuscitate does not mean do not treat, and we're going to talk about that here in a second. Okay, so when we're talking about what we cannot do if somebody has a DNR, which means do not resuscitate, measures that we are not able to resuscitate as EMS is defibrillation, so we're not going to apply the AED and defibrillate the heart. We'll talk about that later on. We're not going to do any kind of external chest compressions or what we call CPR. No artificial respirations for our patient, so we won't be using the BVM in order to help our patient breathe, and we won't be using any kind of invasive airways. So you guys have 2 invasive airways in your scope that you guys will learn. The laryngeal mask airway, or what we call the LMA, and the King airway, which are two of the different kinds of what's called a supraglottic airway device that you guys are able to insert into your patient in order to maintain a patent airway. And we're going to talk about those a little bit more specifically in lab when we actually practice with these and dropping them into patients or into our mannequins. And we'll also talk about that later on when we get into airway management as well. Care that is not affected by a DNR, we can still give oxygen to our patient. We just can't assist them with their breathing, okay? So we can still give oxygen. We are still allowed to suction their airway, okay? We're still able to make sure that that airway stays open and patent for our patients. We can stop any serious bleeding. We can splint any injuries or wounds. You guys don't do this because you guys don't do any kind of pain reduction as far as pharmaceutical interventions. You don't carry pain meds with you at the basic level, but we are able to give pain medicine specifically at the advanced and paramedic levels to our patients. We could do any kind of wound care that we need and comfort care for our patients as well, and comfort care for families, right? Just try to make the patient as comfortable as possible when we are dealing with a DNR for our patients, because we're not going to be there to attempt to save their life, right? We're not doing any kind of resuscitative measures on these patients. We're just making sure that this patient is comfortable with whatever happens to be going on with them, okay? So we're going to talk about this just a little bit here. When people sign a DNR, this is something that they have to get from their primary care physician normally. Okay. This usually means that the patient might have some kind of medical condition that could be terminal to them, and they don't want to go through the process of having any kind of life-saving measures on them, because more than likely they realize that their quality of life will not be the same. Okay, so let's talk about this a little bit, and we're going to have a real kind of blunt conversation here. Okay, we call CPR in EMS. Okay, when we're actually performing CPR, when we're pumping on this patient's chest externally, and we are acting as the heart of this patient, basically. Okay, when we're performing CPR, we call it the last ass kicking you're going to get. Okay, we are pretty successful out here in the Bernalillo County area. Okay, we have some very good numbers compared to other agencies and other counties and other medical services throughout the nation. But we will always respect a DNR. Okay, when somebody signs up for a DNR, they usually have what's known as a power of attorney, or what we call a POA, in place. That power of attorney is usually a family member or a loved one, possibly a spouse, maybe a son or a daughter, to act as the patient's representative in the time when the patient cannot answer for themselves. Okay, to where they are incapacitated by the disease process that they're suffering from, or they're completely 100% unresponsive. We will need the power of attorney there with us to let us know that this patient has a DNR. Okay, in the state of New Mexico, we have a sheet specifically for EMS. Okay, this DNR in the very top of it. Okay, and I'll show you guys this when you guys get to lab. It is a regular 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper, and on the very... Okay, so when do we actually ignore, as EMS and medical professionals, a DNR? Any question with the validity of the DNR? And yes, there are patient family members out there that make DNRs because they don't want their family member to live anymore. Okay, when you see a DNR, and again, I will show you what this looks like in lab. It's going to have the patient's name. It's going to have the date that the DNR was signed. It's going to have the signature of the doctor and their New Mexico license number. Okay, there's going to be a 1-800 number on there where you guys can actually call that 1-800 number to verify that DNR. Every DNR has like a 5 or 6 digit kind of number, specifically the EMS DNRs. For you guys to call that 1-800 number, it's just a voice recording. You pop in that little number and boom, okay, they'll tell you if it's valid or not. And it will also tell you the condition of what the patient is unfortunately dying from. Okay. The other way that we ignore a DNR is if the death involves a homicide. Okay. So the DNR is only there for the medical condition that the patient is dying from. Okay, so I'm going to tell you guys a little story. All right. I was called to a scene of a self-inflicted gunshot wound to the head. Okay. Our local law enforcement showed up. They cleared our scene, and they wanted us to come in to help the patient, right? So as we entered the house, we went into the bathroom of the house, where we saw the patient laying in the bathtub, and it was obvious that they had a self-inflicted gunshot wound to the head. And next to him on the counter was the patient's DNR, beautifully placed so that everyone can see it. Okay. However, unfortunately for the patient did not shoot himself in the head correctly. There is a right and wrong way to do this. Okay. He just happened to do it the wrong way. And the problem with that is that most people, we're going to talk about this a little bit in trauma, is that when people are not 100% sure if they do this, they flinch right before they pull the trigger. Okay? Which means that the bullet doesn't go exactly where they think it was going to go in the first place. All right? So I go in there and I see that this gentleman is still breathing. Okay? And I'm there with the fire department, and I go to pull this gentleman out of the bathtub to put him on solid ground because we are about to work a code. We're going to start resuscitative measures on this patient. And the local law enforcement said, I'm not going to touch the patient, told me that I'm not going to touch the patient because it is an active crime scene and he has a DNR right next to him. And I attempted to explain to law enforcement that the DNR is only for the disease process that the patient is experiencing, and you can't have a DNR for somebody that attempts suicide. Long story short, I was actually arrested. I was detained. I was arrested because I was implemented in disturbing a crime scene. Okay, got into it with law enforcement on scene. Unfortunately, the patient did end up passing away because law enforcement blocked EMS and their abilities to attempt to save the patient's life. Long story short, there was a lot of educational opportunities for law enforcement that EMS had to provide for them. And a lot of meetings, a lot of kumbaya moments, a lot of hugs, a lot of kissing going on, blah, 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 right? But just so you guys know that the DNR is only for the medical condition that the patient is experiencing. Okay? So if the patient decides to end their life, okay, if the patient, let's say, tries to overdose on prescription medications, well, we can treat that even if the patient has the DNR. It's not because this guy had a stage 4 metastatic head-to-toe cancer. Right? That's not what was killing this gentleman. The fact that this guy put a bullet in him, that he ate a bullet and he ate it wrong, is what was killing him. Okay? So hopefully that makes sense to you guys. Okay? We are only going to acknowledge the DNR for the medical condition that the patient is suffering from. Now, that could get a little hinky. Right? We can have that patient with the stage 4 metastatic head-to-toe cancer that's all of a sudden having a heart attack. Well, we are not the ones to decide, right? Well, did the heart attack come because, he's been eating Wendy's Frosties, chocolate Frosties, and dipping his fries in them in that gooey deliciousness of Wendy's Frosties? Or is this because of the actual disease process itself? Is this the end of life for this patient? Does that make sense? So if the people can only get a DNR for a medical condition, okay? If it's something other than a medical condition that the patient is suffering from, we can ignore the DNR, okay? But if this guy's having a heart attack and he's got stage 4 metastatic cancer, right? That's when we have to have this conversation with the patient. That's when we have to have this conversation with the power of attorney of the patient, depending what the situation is, and say, hey, look, sir, ma'am, you are having a heart attack. I understand you have a DNR in place. Okay? I understand that your DNR is for blah, blah, blah. Okay? Whatever the medical condition is. Okay? But right now we're seeing something that's different medically that from your DNR. Now, this could be because this heart attack could be because of the fact that you have metastatic cancer. It may not. What would you like for us to do for you today? And that's the conversation that you're going to have with some people. Right? And I think that's really hard for new EMTs. We teach you guys. Right? And I think this is a disservice to you guys, to be honest with you. Right? We teach you guys to get out there and save lives, save lives, save lives, save lives. Go, 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 go. No. Okay? You guys are not machines. You guys are not monkeys. We're not training you guys to be machines or monkeys. We're training you guys on how to be human beings. We're training you guys on how to have these conversations with these patients. And unfortunately, I can train you on all this stuff for the next 14 weeks throughout the semester. Right? I can give you all of this training. You guys can hear me vomit all this information out in front of you. And hopefully you guys are absorbing this. But any way you look at it, your training does not start until the day you get on an ambulance. Okay? So when you guys get out there, I want you guys listening to what your paramedic is asking your patients. Okay? Hopefully you're paired up with a good paramedic, but that's a whole other conversation someday for another day. Okay? Listen to what they're saying. Okay? Start getting the good and the bad from the different medics that you guys are going to be working with. And try to figure out the type of EMT that you want to be yourself. Okay? I've worked with fantastic medics. Right? I've worked with terrible medics. Okay? I knew exactly when I went to paramedic school the type of medic I wanted to be, and I definitely knew, without a doubt, 100%, the type of medic I didn't want to be. Okay? I'm going to get off my soapbox now, all right? But just remember, okay, a DNR is usually only for a medical, is only for a medical condition. Okay? If we got some trauma going on, if we got something else going on, right, now we got to stop and think and see what is really going on with this patient. Okay? We'll talk about that a little bit more towards the end of the semester when we get into some other situations that I'll put you guys in for your learning enjoyment.